Well, welcome aboard, Mr. Rerez, Shane, or what do we prefer to call you for the show? Because I know I usually get a bunch of people that I bring on and they always prefer to be called something else. So is it either Shane or is it just Rerez?
I'm Shane. The show's Rerez. More people, yeah. It used to be just me, but yeah, it's Shane.
So has it been like that a lot of times for you whenever you go to a convention and then they see you in person and they always call you Rerez, or is it just like usually the other way around?
Typically, yeah, it's when people see me at a convention or out in public somewhere. It's Rerez always. Very few people actually call me Shane. Some do, but it's usually Rerez.
But yeah, I was not really expecting to get to this interview as soon as it was. I know that last month, which by the time this is recording, is pretty much around February. But during January, I know you guys were busy working on the final, hopefully final Stadia video. And congratulations for getting that little, would you say it's like a quadrilogy of videos, or how many would you
It's
call it?
yeah, it's a trilogy. It's a trilogy. There's only three. I don't think there's going to be another one. But yeah, when you originally reached out, we were like in the heat of production for it, and it had to come out at a very specific date. Um, when we found out the actual end date for Stadia, we actually had a time, a specific like day, a specific time, and
Mhm.
we wanted to make sure that our video launched the exact moment Stadia was over, so that every bit of information we had in the video up until that moment was like accurate. And there's things that we added after the fact, once we had kind of wrapped what we were shooting, and more things started to come out, so we added more things in, and that was all done to just to make sure that we had the most up to date. Here's the entire story of Stadia done right here.
Would you say that, like, out of all the videos that you've done for the Worst of series, would you say that that was, like, the most time consuming with, like, all of the combined videos together, as opposed to some other ones that you produced in the past?
For sure. The first episode was crazy. I didn't think I wasn't because I was actually excited about Stadia. I love the idea of more people getting into the game space and making consoles and stuff. And there's some videos of me from the past being really excited about Stadia. But every time they talked about it, literally every time, the more and more they talked about it before the launch happened, it got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I was confident that they didn't know how to demonstrate this, show it off, explain it, and it was getting really bad. But I still had some semblance of hope after that first video, because I was
Mhm.
thinking, hey, it's got to get better than this, right? And then it ended up not getting better. It got a lot worse. And then, yeah, after that second video, there was a lot of people asking me to do like follow up videos to like follow up what was going on with Stadia, but I really didn't want to. I was much more interested in the idea of like, after the first video, after the second video, they can change something, they can make something better. Then
Mhm.
our third video could have been something like, here's how they made Stadia work, right? Because there's always that chance. There's always a chance someone can change something and modify it to be better.
Mhm.
But that ended up not happening. And that last video, for the past year and a half or whatever, I just been keeping up with what was going on Stadia and writing bits and pieces of the script over time. And then eventually it turned into what that was, and our entire team worked on it together to make it part three of a trilogy, and most likely the final.
Yeah, hopefully so, unless somewhere down the line Google decides they want to throw their hat into the ring and try to attempt to make some kind of like a far better version of it. So, since we're on that, what would you say would be the one thing that they would have done better to make it a more better product? And like, let's say, for example, if they did something kind of like a Game Pass, similar to what Microsoft does for their Xbox brand, would you say something
Yeah.
like that would have been better, or would it have
Oh
been like
yeah.
something
Yeah.
else?
No, 100%. If they had done a Game Pass like service, they did have a pro service, right? Which did have a library of games that you could get.
Mhm.
But the problem was that they didn't do it the right way. It didn't have the games that people really wanted to play. There were some good games on it, but the experience was all over. I think what would have made it better is the thing that Microsoft offers, which is the ability to play the games on local hardware, not just online. So for, I want to say, ever since GoldenEye came out,
Mhm.
I Microsoft has this. I have a Steam Deck, and Microsoft has this guide for how to get Game Pass or XCloud to run on the Steam Deck. So I was like, I just want to see what this is like. So I tried it out. Perfect. It runs perfectly. I'm running GoldenEye 64 on Xbox Series X hardware on a Steam Deck through the cloud, and it runs perfectly. But just like Stadia, it doesn't work for everyone because wherever you are, wherever you're living, you might have a different internet connection, you might have
Mhm.
different hardware, and it can affect things. And I just happen to be in a space in an area with an internet connection where it works. And Stadia needed to offer a solution where you could download the game locally. And I think because Stadia was running completely on Linux, there should have been some way for them to make an operating system or a distribution of Linux that offered that kind of that ability so people could just download their games and play them locally. But they chose not to do that. And what we ended up getting was kind of this free for all mess of ideas and just a philosophy that kind of didn't come through. And I honestly
Mhm.
think that every moment that passed with Stadia, like I said, it just kind of got worse and worse. And there were some people out there that really liked what they were playing and really enjoyed the games. But at the end of the day, what needed to happen was they needed games that were unique and specific to them that they created and they controlled to demonstrate what Stadia could do over other existing pieces of hardware. And nothing they did ever showed that off. If you played a game on Stadia, that game could exist on any other platform. There was no difference there that showed off something unique that Stadia had an advantage of.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to remember when the whole entire platform launched. Like, was it under $200 or was it somewhere more than that? For like, let's say the Pro bundle.
I forget what it was exactly, but that's the problem, right? There is no one price. I know that there's a lot of folks out there that look at the launch bundle, look at those things, and they think, well, that's what the price is. But
Mhm.
that's not what the price is. There's more to a cost in paying for a system. If you buy a PlayStation or an Xbox, you need a TV. So you might not have the TV that you want to play the system on. You might need to go out and get a 4K TV. Maybe you want to play games online with your friends. Maybe you need a better internet connection.
Mhm.
Maybe you need speakers. Maybe you need headphones. Maybe you need more controllers. There are hidden costs throughout that stuff, and no matter what that base price was for Stadia, at the end of the day, what you needed was a lot more than what they were offering. And that bundle pack that they sold, the Founders Edition, which I have somewhere, yeah, honestly, right in front
Oh,
of me, because
keep it on hand.
yeah, like this is not a bad controller. I it's like it feels good in the hands, but the problem is what this represents is a piece of hardware you needed to play Stadia. If you were playing it on a TV, for example, you needed a controller. If you didn't have a controller, you had to go out and buy a controller.
Hmm.
And some TVs uh, didn't have the same accessibility as others. So, for example, maybe you had, let's just say the Chromecast, which was the little puck that you plugged into the TV to actually get Stadia to work.
Oh,
That
yeah.
Chromecast existed beforehand. This was the Ultra version, which gave it, like, I guess, a bit more processing power. One of the things we never covered on the show because I couldn't verify it enough. But I did feel the puck. It got really really hot, and for some people it overheated.
Oh,
So they actually ended
jeez.
up gluing like heat sinks to it and stuff. But without like a definitive one-on-one experience with that, I didn't really want us to cover that in the show.
Mhm.
But with something like this, if you had a TV that didn't have Bluetooth connectivity and you had that Chromecast, which the Chromecast, as far as I'm aware, did not have Bluetooth capabilities, you would need to play it with this controller, which had Wi-Fi support built in so that you could actually connect to the game through Wi-Fi. So you're using a lot of crazy hardware, a lot of different ideas, a lot of concepts that together, I don't think it works. I think that what they ended up doing was such a hodgepodge of ideas, such a mix that it confused gamers. And the simplicity of how a game works is just better. And hardware should be simple for the consumer. Like, I don't know, you go out and you buy a Switch,
Mhm.
just works. You know, you don't even need a TV. You've got the Switch right there. It's got the screen. And that's the kind of stuff that Stadia was missing. It felt disconnected from everything else. And it didn't feel like it was this one stop, easy to use solution. For some people that already had built in hardware and the ability to just play stuff, that was better. But I think for a lot of people out there that were looking for a console replacer, they ended up spending a lot of money just to do that, and it was a wash if they had just gone out and bought a console anyway.
Yeah, and I think like another nail in the coffin of Stadia was basically the release of the Steam Deck, because it's essentially like what it technically does is play the modern stuff but on a portable handheld, and usually runs a lot better because all of your software is on there, including emulators. I'm not going to really tell anybody where to go for that. But yeah, it seems like it would have done so much better had it been or better equipped with hardware, but instead of just using the Chromecast. But I never understood why it was using Wi-Fi for the controller. I don't think I've ever heard of any company doing that before.
Well, I think the reason why they did that was simply because if you wanted to play Stadia on a TV that didn't have Bluetooth support,
Mhm.
you had to go through your Wi-Fi. That's really what it was. Think of it about it this way: if they created a new kind of Google Chromecast puck or a new piece of hardware that had Bluetooth support on it, then they would have been making hardware for Stadia, which defeats the purpose. The Founders Edition is not supposed to be a unique piece of hardware for Stadia founders. It was supposed to be, here's existing hardware besides the controller, but
Mhm.
here's existing hardware that we can utilize that showcases how easy this is. Developing a new piece of like streaming hardware that to do that means that you're making something, and the moment they did that, it defeated the purpose of what Stadia was.
Mhm.
Steam Deck uh, is expensive, way more expensive than what Stadia was at its launch, and that's fine because it is what it is. It's a piece of internalized hardware that can run games anywhere. And you're right, that local hardware means that you don't have to be reliant on being near a Wi-Fi connection or any kind of wireless connection in order to play your games. But what makes Stadia, I think, kind of hurt in a way, and what makes the Steam Deck so much more impressive is that the Steam Deck is based upon Linux.
Mhm.
And what they did was they got a way to make a bunch of Windows games run natively in a piece of mobile hardware on Linux. What they did with Stadia was they tried to convince a bunch of developers to make their games work on Linux by using this different like development background.
Mhm.
And it's not impossible. There's a whole bunch of developers out there that are capable of taking their games and moving them over to a Linux based operating system. But one of the problems was that that was time out of the developer's hands. With Steam Deck, sometimes the game just worked. Their emulation software, their entire like concept for how to get that to work is so much more robust. And I think if they had just worked on something like that and given people the ability to use anything they wanted on Stadia, I think Stadia would have been a lot more successful. But at the end of the day, it's like I said, it's the perfect wrong ideas in the right order that just made it kind of fall apart. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that had a lot of fun with Stadia, and they ended up getting really upset when it was gone because for them that was their platform of choice. But if you have an entire platform completely reliant on streaming, then you better hope that that platform never goes away. Because if it does, well, that's kind of the end of everything you were doing and the end of your entire platform and all your games.
Mhm. And since we're on the topic of that type of service, do you ever see like somewhere like down the line that we could see some kind of cloud-based storage or like a cloud server to be able to play anywhere you want without relying on using any sort of like SSD or something close to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this isn't some figment of my imagination. It's a real thing that's going to happen. Right now, I think many of us use Google Drive, and Google Drive has the ability for you to drop files on there. And I know when I'm working with my team, sometimes we share video files and we share them on Drive so that we can just access them really quick. And there's a lot of people that utilize stuff like that. So yeah, I can clearly see a point in the future, and I believe if I had to guess which company is going to do it first, it's probably going to be Microsoft.
Mhm.
Um, Giving the ability for the consumer to use just a generic front end operating system, depending on what it is, and they have the ability to run whatever they want on that piece of hardware. There are some legal issues with that, but I imagine that once they get past that stuff, it's going to be great because there's going to be games that would run very well on a service like that and not take much to actually run. So a great example of this was during the early days of Stadia. What I was surprised Google didn't do was purchase a library of older games, stuff that people already know, and just launch with that older list of games. Um, it could have been Data East. It could have been doing some kind of licensing deal with Sega. Just somebody, Activision, Acclaim, or not Acclaim, but Activision, and just getting some of their older games on there, just running natively. And then having that happen so that when you go on their service, you have this amazing library of older games you can access, and that would have been less taxing on their initial hardware.
Mhm.
Thinking of it like this, it doesn't take much to run a game like Zork, but it takes a heck of a lot more to run something like Cyberpunk. And if you could have one server blade running 17 instances of Zork or whatever else, it's way more robust than having one server blade running one version of, or just one instance of Cyberpunk. It would have been better for them as an entire service. But they didn't do anything like that. Like the things you would think they would want to do, they just chose to completely avoid all of that altogether.
Well, we pretty much got that out of the way, and we'll get back to worst of series because I've got a few questions about that. But your YouTube journey, I had to double check to make sure when you got started, and on your page it was around 2012. The one
That's
thing
right.
that I
Yeah.
remember when you started originally, like your earlier videos, you were like outside somewhere, like you were out like hiking and you were just like talking to a camera and talking about personal opinions about video games. And the amount of like transition from that to doing the worst of series and just how you've been able to get more energetic with your videos. So, one thing I have to ask about that is when was it you wanted to decide that, hey, I want to start making video content, and I think basically doing these type of videos would be fun? Was it because you saw other people doing it, or was it just something that you wanted to just give a try for yourself?
Well, I was a huge, huge fan of watching like a bunch of other YouTubers talking about video games, and I liked watching Tech TV or G4 or whatever. I liked watching Electric Playground and a bunch of other like TV shows and stuff. Um, and on YouTube, what I found was a lot of people were talking a lot about popular games and not the games I kind of knew about. And I wanted to make a series that kind of focused more on some of the more obscure and weird stuff. And I didn't know too many people that were doing that at the time. Um, I was kind of inspired by the walking and talking aspect. That stuff
Mhm.
came from Rick Mercer, who's this Canadian, like a journalist slash comedian, and he would actually do these walk and talks out in public. And I kind of thought that was really neat. But I also was inspired by Alton Brown from the Food Network. He
Oh,
created these
yeah.
really cool, like, good eats, and it's like this great series talking about food. And I like the energy that he brought on the stuff, so I kind of wanted to incorporate that too. Didn't have the budget, but I wanted to try something like that. And Top Gear as well, just like showing a car in a more fun way that anyone could get into it. And that's kind of what I wanted those videos to be. But the beginning of what Rerez was, I did not want to be on camera. Originally, Rerez was supposed to be a television pilot,
Mhm.
and it had different people in it. It wasn't me, and I worked with a friend of mine to actually make this whole thing happen. But it didn't work out at all. We couldn't get people to be interested. We couldn't get people to, especially in industry, to talk about that stuff and to actually make a very successful, like very expensive pilot. We just didn't have the funding and budget for that. So I was homesick one day, and the show wasn't moving forward, and I decided to just try and make a video on my own and see if I could be in front of the camera and do that stuff. And yeah, kind of kept going from that point, and I just did it by myself, and it just kind of grew from there. And I think the original goal of making kind of like opinion pieces and stuff like that, it kind of went away because what I was trying to be back then was more technical and specific. And I find that no matter how technical and specific you are, you're not technical and specific enough for people. So you tend to miss things that other people are thinking of, and it creates debates and like kind of attacks online and stuff. And
Mhm.
the entire retro community in general is very insular, and it's a lot of people that tend to be super angry a lot about gaming being misrepresented. So I decided to try other things, and the worst ever series kind of grew because I didn't expect that to be a series. It was just a one-off video,
Mhm.
but people really like that. And then I looked around and thought, well, no one's really covering these kind of systems. So I just kind of dived into that and covering those systems and trying to explore them in ways others haven't, or just others had never looked at before.
Mhm.
And Just Bad Games kind of came out of the same spot where we were looking at making a short series of videos about arcade games that people had never really talked about before that were bad. And then it kind of just snowballed into this beast that it is now, which is like it's its own thing. It's the channel right now is really just Worst Ever and Just Bad Games. It's these two things, but they're not exactly the same. They feel very distinctively different, but they are about bad hardware, bad software, and what makes those things bad, and kind of exploring them in a way that I don't know many people really try to explore those games in.
Oh, I gotcha. Now, back onto the topic of the walking and talking segments. I know that that had to have taken so many retries because with like you being outside, and I assume that there's like maybe some vehicles that are driving by, they see this guy looking at a camera and just talking. Have you had interruptions before they had to re-record, or has it just been like you were lucky to be able to get like one full shot in?
Believe it or not, there was a couple of instances where I just did it, and there was no script.
Mhm.
That's kind of the weird thing. I couldn't memorize scripts back then. Still can't. If I'm using a script, it's on like a monitor or whatever. But typically, those things were just off the top of my head, and I just talked about whatever I was talking about. And Usually, if I had to redo it again, it was then a completely different like thing, and that's kind of what that was. So usually when you saw those, unless we really screwed up and I had to rewind, it didn't happen all that much. I think the most we ever did was I think 4 or 5 takes, and plus Nick Murphy, who was doing the I think he goes by a different handle online, but when Nick was actually shooting those things, his arms would get tired because he's carrying like a Steadicam rig to make all that work. So it was kind of, you got to do this right as easily as you can quickly so that his arms don't like fall off when he's doing it.
And that's the one that goes like around the waist, or like holding up a pole, something like that, or is it like a shoulder mount type of device?
Uh, I believe we had variations of it. I think I would sometimes rent certain things from him, but we had the arm. I think he had the vest. I did have an arm piece at one point, but I think he had more of a complete setup. Nick Montgomery, by the way, that was his name, not Nick Murphy. I don't know why I said Nick Murphy. That's someone else I know. But yeah, Nick had a lot of that stuff already. He's a cinematographer. He's an editor. He's done major motion pictures and stuff now. But at the time, everyone was just a little bit younger and newer and starting things out. And I asked him to be on board with that because I wanted somebody with experience to fill that stuff.
Okay, yeah, and like I said before, it's you've done it since 2012, but even like early on, the amount of quality that you had put in your videos was like, at the time everybody was just starting off cheap, and they either had like a Sony Handycam on hand, or it was just like some very cheap webcam footage. But you went like above and beyond to perform like that top-notch quality, and it's like I never remembered anyone, maybe aside from Classic Game Room, whenever they were putting their stuff out. Yeah, that was something that really surprised me, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people whenever y'all were putting any videos like that together. I guess we can get on to one of the other questions related to that. What would you say is the most challenging part whenever you're putting a video together? Is it mostly just audio, or is it video, or is it just the amount of transitions that you put usually into any of your episodes, any videos you?
Worst Ever is different from Just Bad. Worst Ever is sometimes easier to make because I can sit in front of the camera and just and I read our script and we can cut back to that whenever we need to. But Just Bad Games, I think, is the hardest thing we make right now. That requires because we're not on camera when we shoot that. Everything is off camera. So you have to fill every bit of visual information on the screen. So it's like you're editing an entire like video. If somebody is talking on camera, you can always cut back to them on camera because we don't do that with Just Bad. You end up having to have to record a lot of footage. Because when we make Just Bad Games, we don't want to make episodes that feel like other episodes other people have covered in the same topic. Like when we go to cover a game,
Mhm.
we don't watch other people that have covered the game. We avoid doing that because we don't want to be influenced by other people and we want to come up with our own opinions, our own thoughts. And when we do what we do after we've written our script, then sometimes we'll take a look at somebody else's thing
Mhm.
and see if we said something too close to them and we'll remove it because we don't want because it's natural. Sometimes you're going to say something that's a criticism of something and it will be very close to what their criticism is.
Mhm.
And maybe it's a similar style joke. We try to pull those out whenever we see them because we don't watch everybody in the world, but we want to make sure that some of our peers and our friends that we're trying to take those things out. But what ends up coming from that is kind of like a hyper fixation on weird aspects of the games that I don't think many people really got into. So, for an example, when we cover a video game on the show, we will look at if it's from a series, we will look at everything that that series has. We will play almost every game in a series and record tons of footage from it so that when we go to talk about that game, we're coming from a perspective of a fresh take on what we've looked at. We'll look at the hardware from the time period, news from the time period, and a whole bunch of other things just to get that episode to work the way it should. And sometimes we'll go really deep into details that probably don't need to be that deep, but we
Mhm.
find it funny. Um, I guess the best way to explain this would be in the episode for The Quiet Man that we did for Just Bad Games. There's this part where we talk about an Egyptian deity and like how that relates to everything and the symbolism behind everything they're doing. And we never heard anyone talk about this. We no one mentioned this anywhere. How everyone reviewed the game, it's very topical, like why the game is bad. There's people that do that very well. Matt McMuscles has his own show. How to oh my gosh, I just forgot the name of the show. Uh, but yeah, his whole show is like getting into why the game is bad from the development side, or how it happened. So it's like, here's what the developers were doing, here's how it got together, here's how the game came together, and here's why it doesn't work. And that entire like whole run is really really cool of just focusing on what makes that not happen. But a Just Bad Games experience is us telling you why it's not playing right, and it's kind of going with you, the viewer, as we play the game together. It's different. Um, so with the Quiet Man, we were trying to figure out what everything meant because I think people tend to believe that when a video game is made or when a movie is made or whatever, there's no reason behind that stuff. And maybe it's just bad because it's bad. But we tend to think that even a bad game has some symbolism in it. And Quiet Man did have symbolism. It was just super hidden. And we didn't hear anyone from the developer side talk about this, but we discovered that, yeah, the shoes he's holding has Horus on it, and Horus is that Egyptian god, and Horus is a representation of a specific time of day. And we discovered everything about that was all connected and wrapped in the way that they brought things together and talked about things. And it all came together and we showed off in the video, but no one else would really have that in their video because
Mhm.
that's us super analyzing something that wasn't written anywhere, that isn't for anyone else to kind of like combine. And that's what I think is the hardest part from our videos. It's not just the topical bad things that you see everyone sees. It's like this hidden aspect that if you raise your focus on, you'll find. And that's what we like to find in the videos. And that's usually what makes what we do so much fun, but also insanely time consuming.
Since we're continuing to talk a bit about the worst of series, and I know that you originally started with that Wii knockoff, and it had like a few different versions of it. Like, I don't even know what they're up to now. It's like over 1,000 different variants that are out. Um, that's been like one of your, would you say, most successful series that you've done for the channel? Because it seems like you get a lot of people that are interested in watching it. And that's the other thing I want to ask is like, what made you want to like just continue making videos for that particular series? Was it mostly because you saw other things that were out there, or was it just because that you didn't know what else to make at the time?
Well, so the first thing that happened was I was with my friend at a discount like liquidation store,
Mhm.
and yeah, I'll always mention this. It's funny because he'll think it's funny too. But we saw the system there, and I said I should make a video on that, and he said no one would ever pay attention to that. No one is ever going to watch that video. That's a bad idea. And I bought it because I was like, there's something here. There's got to be something about this because I don't think anyone's ever really talked about this before.
Mhm.
And when I did the video, it was stressful. That video, if you go back and watch it now, there are so many problems with it and issues with it that like now going back and looking at it, I can see what those things are. The system randomly switched resolutions at a point, and when it does that, it actually
Jeez.
broke the capture card I was using. So by the time you see that footage, that is the third time I've played the system all the way through. So I'm tired, I'm ragged. There's a light behind my head, the cables like just by my head, like I just couldn't move it at a time. Um, it was just I was so burnt out from that video just because it was supposed to be just a quick little video, but
Mhm.
ended up becoming like a beast in it of itself. That entire system was not supposed to be a sequel. I didn't know there was a sequel. I didn't know anyone had ever released more of these. I only knew of this one. I knew there were knockoff consoles before, but I didn't know to the extent of how big that world was. And the information that was available online was so minuscule at the time. There was no website for wireless 60. Like it didn't exist. There was no search for wireless 60. When you typed in wireless 60 on Google, what you would get was wireless 360 controllers. Like that's what you would get. You wouldn't get the system. So no one had any information. Nobody had any data on that stuff. But when that video blew up, um, I forget where I was, but there was somebody was like, "Oh, there's another one of these." And I think it was on Amazon, and I was like, "No way!" So I bought it, and I was like, "This is insane." They made another, so I did a video on that one, and that one was supposed to be more like, "Well, it's just crazy. There's no way there's going to be another one of these." Then it turned out there was another one of these, and I've looked into it now, and there are so many more that were not like I don't even think anyone gets how many of these things there are. But one problem that you see online is a lot of people tend to like they come in now with a lot more knowledge about these systems because there's just all this wonderful information online about it. But at the time, there was nothing. No one knew where these things came from. Nobody knew where these companies were originating from.
Mhm.
So what ended up being was this like every time I do a video, I'd get like five different pieces of information that would get laid on it. And in some cases, if you go watch some of those videos, um, in the comments for the videos, the people that made the things will actually be there and they'll say what was going on behind the scenes. This happens a lot more now than I ever thought it was going to happen. And they explain, I worked for this company, we were contracted to do this, and that happened, and then all this information just becomes knowledge now that everyone can share, and that's really cool. But that entire like series really did start Rerez into a very different direction. And I want to say I wasn't trying to fight against it, but I was making other videos, serious reviews and other things like that. That I honestly thought that was where the channel should go. I didn't think the channel should just be about covering worst consoles.
Mhm.
And it continued to grow and continue to grow to a point where I couldn't ignore it. And now I don't believe The wireless 60 system video is the biggest video on the channel now. It's the Soldier Boy videos,
Hmm.
which like went way over. I never expected those videos to be big because I didn't expect to do a Soldier Boy video. I remember when that news came out, it was just they just showed off some consoles on his website, and I was collect. It's that whole video happened because the wireless 60 systems were covered by us in the first place. I had been going out and buying all these bad pieces of hardware and things that I saw. And then when he released his website, I was like, oh, I own all these. I own every single one of these. We can make a video on this. And the only one I didn't own, a viewer that was in the city next to me ended up having it. And that system to this day, I don't think anyone else has ever covered it on YouTube because it's kind of impossible. But
Oh
yeah, it
yeah.
was really hard to find. And yeah, that series is what brought a lot of people to Rerez in general was that kind of stuff. So it's not that much of a surprise now whenever we release a new episode that people are excited about that because we tend to do the same like coverage of other weird and bad systems. And yeah, that's it's kind of strange, but it was never the goal. The goal was to make more serious reviews of things and less like fun videos, I guess. They were supposed to be fun, but just not funny in that way.
Oh, I gotcha. Now, could the same be said for the video games themselves, like the titles? I'm trying to think of the biker game that a lot of people agreed was like one of the worst, like, I don't know, beat 'em ups or whatever you call it, where people are having sex on beds with like clothes on. I'm trying to think of the which one. Road to
Ride to
Hell.
Hell.
Yeah, Ride to Hell.
Yeah, Ride to Hell Retribution. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen so many people cover over that, and it's like every time somebody does their version of it, it's just as funny as the next person who does it. So, would you say that that was one of the more broken games that you played for the show, or was there like another one that you said that's like a lot worse than that one?
Ride the Hell was in a very bad state. To be fair, I think Cyberpunk 2077 was worse at
Mhm.
launch. I think that game was in a way worse state than Ride to Hell, which is saying quite a bit. But yeah, the of all the games we've covered on the channel, that one is pretty functionally broken. Like it has so many problems, so many glitches, so many errors, and it feels really incomplete. Um, but I think I honestly can't think of any other one on the show right now that would be in like in that kind of bad where it's just like
Mhm.
you can't imagine why this was released. I have played other games that are in a similar state of incompletion, but they haven't been made into videos because I just felt like there was something about them that was missing. Like it's just not funny.
Mhm.
With the Ouya, when we did that video, there are a whole bunch of games on the Ouya that feel broken, if not more broken than Ride to Hell. But Ride to Hell is from a big company; it's not from a bunch of independent developers, so it really changes the way that I look at Ride to Hell. But yeah, Ride to Hell is it's serious. Like that is a seriously that is the room of video games, pretty much.
Actually, that's a good comparison. I know that some people usually use that reference for a movie for like other forms of media, but yep,
Yeah,
sorry
it
about
is. It is pretty wild. It's there was so many there was so much in the game that we found that was wrong and bad,
that. Mhm.
and you can see why it happened, right? It's not a mystery. You know what they were trying to go for. You know what they were trying to do. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable. It is, and I recommend people play it too. Like you have to experience that game at least once to know how. Like, because a lot of people tend to say, "Oh, this new game I bought is bad," and it's like, yeah, but you got to play Ride to Hell to know what bad is before you can start saying that this game's bad because that game's passable. It happens a lot. People tell me to play a game that they think is really bad, and then I play it, and I'm like, I don't know, it's not that bad. I've played worse. It's just mediocre. I think people tend to think mediocre games instantly means they're bad, but no, mediocre game is a mediocre game. But a bad game is special. It's something different. It really, really, really does change the way you look at other games after playing it.
I gotcha. So I know that we're getting close to the finish line for this recording, but one thing that I do want to ask for you personally, I know that you guys are in the middle of upgrading for a new studio or getting ready for like a big move. But as far as like your videos for whether it's the worst of or just bad or like any other videos that you got down the pipe, what are some hints that you can give people that are listening to this right now that you're working on right now?
Well, I guess what we're doing right now is we are making a new episode of our next game series, which is our kind of our secondary channel, our podcast, where we kind of invent sequels to old games
Mhm.
or games that haven't had a sequel. And right now, our next episode is going to be a sequel to Morph Man, which is one of our favorite Just Bad Games episodes. So we've actually created two concepts for the games, and because I did the voiceover for Morphman, we actually have new Morphman dialogue that's in the episode that we're going to be
Oh,
showing off.
nice.
So we're pretty excited about that. And then we've got two Just Bad games that we're working on right now, and we also have another Worst Ever that we're working on. So typically, how we do things is we work on multiple episodes at once through our different team members. And yeah, I can't reveal what they are right now, but one is a super popular sports game that had one bad entry that kind of like rocked the entire series to nothing. And the other one is probably one of the most popular video game franchises we've ever covered on the show, but it has one bad entry that we don't think anyone's really talked about before.
Mm, you know what? I may have an idea as to which one you're talking about because I'm pretty sure I got it from Game Crazy back in the day, and I was very disappointed with how it is. I won't say it either. So people, go over to Rerez's YouTube channel at youtube.com/Rerez, or check him out on his Twitter, which you can see right below his video footage right now. So, with that being said, thank you for dropping by. I know that this is a lot shorter than a lot of the recordings we usually do for these interviews, but both of us were busy, but we were able to knock it off somehow. But thank you, Shane, Rerez, whichever people want to know you by. It was a pleasure to have you on for the recording.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's not a problem. And if there's anything else that's going on with you at the moment, feel free to let them know if you're going to be at any conventions or anything in the future.
Don't have anything planned right now, but stay tuned on the channel. We got a lot of fun stuff coming out.
Excellent. Well, once again, thank you very much for coming on the recording. It was a pleasure to have you on, man.
All right. Thank you so much. We tend to think that even a bad game has some symbolism in it, and Quiet Man did have symbolism. It was just super hidden, and we didn't hear anyone from the developer side talk about this, but we discovered that yeah, the shoes he's holding is has Horus on it, and Horus is that Egyptian god, and Horus is a representation of a specific time of day. And we discovered everything about that was all connected and wrapped in the way that they brought things together and talked about things. And it all came together, and we showed off in the video, but no one else would really have that in their video because
Mhm.
that's us super analyzing something that wasn't written anywhere, that isn't for anyone else to kind of like combine. And that's what I think is the hardest part from our videos. It's not just the topical bad things that you see everyone sees. It's like this hidden aspect that if you raise your focus on, you'll find. And that's what we like to find in the videos. And that's usually what makes what we do so much fun, but also insanely time consuming.
My mic arm is like starting me.
Sure.
Okay, now it's not moving. I don't know why it was doing that because while you were finishing up, I've just been adjusting this. Kept like moving away from me. Okay.
No problem.